Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off today. Right now on Morning News Now, the clock is ticking. Time is running out for President Biden and congressional leaders to hammer out a deal on the debt limit. Now, experts warn no compromise could trigger a financial catastrophe. Where negotiations stand right now as the president gets ready to meet with lawmakers again today. Deadly shooting. This morning, 3 people are dead and 2 officers are recovering after police say a teenage gunman opened fire in a New Mexico neighborhood. What we're learning about the situation that unfolded and the victims. Under stress, the state of the economy is taking a major toll on Americans' mental health. A new survey found more than half of us are under greater stress because of rising costs. A mental health expert joins us this hour to break down the best ways to handle those money headaches. Plus, kicking off summer, Memorial Day, the unofficial start of the summer season, is quickly approaching. That means millions of Americans will be getting out of town, and it could be one of the busiest Memorial Day weekends in years. We have the ways you should prepare for your trip and the best and worst times to hit the road. We begin this morning with the fight over the debt ceiling in Washington. A pivotal meeting will take place today between President Biden and top congressional leaders at the White House. The U.S. is looking to avoid a potentially devastating default on its debt obligation, something that has never happened before. Now, in a new letter to Congress yesterday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the U.S. is still projected to hit that debt ceiling limit as early as June 1st. That's 2 weeks from Thursday. On Capitol Hill, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said little progress has been made during negotiations between both sides.
I still think we're far apart. It doesn't seem to me yet that they want it. It just seems that they want to look like they're in a meeting, but they're not. They're not talking anything serious. I think we've got to have a deal done by this weekend to be able to have a timeline to be able to pass it.
For the latest, we are again joined this morning by Team Allie, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale and NBC News White House correspondent Ali Raffa. Yesterday, it was so nice, we decided to do it twice. Good morning to both of you. Ali Raffa, let's start with you. NBC News has now learned Vice President Harris is expected to take part in today's White House meeting. That's according to a source that's familiar with her plans. Now, that's notable because she was not in last week's meeting. So what should we know about the VP's participation today? Does that tell us anything?
Yeah, Joe, good morning. Well, Ali V and I, having both covered the 2020 campaign trail, remember how often President Biden, then as a candidate, would talk about how valuable and how important it was for him to be former President Obama's right-hand man in critical meetings like the one we're going to see take part today. And this is essentially the president doing the same thing for his vice president, Kamala Harris. And this is sort of this part of this shift in strategy and optics that we're seeing since the president announced he's running for re-election. You're seeing Vice President Harris much more publicly visible. She's taking the lead on certain big issues for the administration, certainly reproductive rights, for example. So the president wants to be able to lead to this summit in Asia and subsequently Australia with faith and confidence that this is being handled and someone is taking the lead on this while he's going to be away. We know that White House officials are saying that he's going to be briefed daily on these talks as they're ongoing, but he will have a point person in D.C. handling this while he's going to be overseas. And sources familiar with these talks say that essentially Vice President Kamala Harris's role in the room is going to be sort of the voice of the American people to remind the top players in this room how catastrophic a debt default for the first time in American history would be for the average American.
And let's talk more about that default. Ali Vitale, Treasury Secretary Yellen reiterated the U.S. still on target to really hit that mark in a few weeks. We just heard a little from House Speaker McCarthy. Where does he stand right now? Does he see a path to compromise?
Yeah, look, that was part of my conversation, and I had several over the course of yesterday with Speaker McCarthy, and he continued to sound a pessimistic tone about where these talks and negotiations are right now. When we left town, along with lawmakers on Friday, there was almost a little bit of a mood of optimism, and you heard that echoed by President Biden over the weekend, but certainly the speaker coming in and immediately, first thing off the bat, on Monday morning, throwing cold water on the optimism of those talks, and then repeating throughout the day the fact that he needs to see more progress, and of course, blaming the White House. Now, if you put that aside, I did ask Speaker McCarthy yesterday what he would need to feel a little bit better about the state of these talks. What could happen in the room this afternoon that would make him feel more optimistic? And his response was that he just needed to see progress. Now, we're tending to see a few progress points, Joe, around different pieces where there could be compromise, whether that's on work requirements for certain entitlement programs or it's around permitting reform. There's a few different avenues that this could go down on the spending front or on the legislating front. But again, until these principal players get in the room, which we'll see them do later today, it's hard to say that anything is fully on or off the table because they're the ones who decide.
So, Aliara, we know the White House issued some projections laying out the potential impact a default would have on the economy. Bottom line, those are some big impacts. And all this worry does really center around a debt ceiling bill. But really, this is about spending, specifically cutting spending. So explain to us the challenges that this has presented for the White House and the House Speaker, why we're really in this potential mess.
Yeah, well, not only are you seeing these two storylines play out between Speaker McCarthy and President Biden, one of them saying that these two sides are still pretty far apart. Then you have President Biden saying he's very optimistic. These talks are being productive. We're also seeing sort of a shift in which deadlines are observed by each side. President Biden and the other parties involved, besides Speaker McCarthy that we've heard, has said he's eyeing this weekend as his deadline. They are eyeing still that so-called X date of June 1st. So these different deadlines are being observed, and there's still, as Ali mentioned, these potential areas of common ground. But when you think of the differing sides and who's really drawing hard lines in the sand on what each side wants, there's a lot of work to get done in a very short period of time. Sources familiar with these talks say that the White House staffers have drawn a hard line in the sand on things like spending cuts to the Inflation Reduction Act, cuts to federal programs like SNAP, Medicaid, student debt relief. Budget caps are also in the mix as well. You have Republicans seeking as many as 10 years of those, Democrats seeking around 2 years. So what sort of common ground and negotiations are met in this meeting is going to be critical, Joe.
And Ali V, very quickly, where do congressional Democrats stand in this standoff right now?
Squarely behind the White House and President Biden. And look, unity has been something that they have regularly trumpeted throughout this process. Moderates and progressives alike have said that they're proud of the way that they've been able to stand behind the White House and try to bolster President Biden's negotiating position. Ultimately, whenever there is a deal, moderate Democrats will, of course, on the House side, come along and vote for this because they know not only does it look good in their home districts, but also it's the deal that the White House and the president have negotiated. We're so far from that point at this point, but at the same time, we're watching on the Republican side, McConnell throw his weight fully behind McCarthy, allowing him to lead these negotiations. And then you have Schumer and Jeffries on the Democratic side, fully standing behind the White House and President Biden, continuing to enforce the red lines that Ali was just talking about, and the places where they see negotiation ability and the places that they don't.
All right. Sadly, we have to break up the alleys right now. Ali Rafa, thank you for your reporting this morning. Ali Vitale, stick around for our next story. That's because we are going to stay on Capitol Hill. Today, the former top executives of the failed Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank are going to face some tough questions from lawmakers over their bank's collapses. We're going to hear from Greg Becker, the former CEO of SVB, along with former Signature Bank executives Scott Shea and Eric Howell. All are scheduled to testify before the Senate Banking Committee. It is the first time they have spoken in public about the bank's failure. So let's bring back Ali Vitale to give us a preview of the hearing today. Ali, this is the first time lawmakers are going to have the chance to really grill the three executives following these bank failures. How do we expect this to play out?
Yeah, look, this is something that lawmakers, especially those on the Senate Banking Committee, led on the Democratic side by Senator Sherrod Brown, they've been hankering for this for many months since we saw those banks collapse. The fact now that they're getting these former presidents and CEOs in front of their committee is important, and I think that it really only predicts fireworks. These are people who this committee has wanted to talk to, has wanted to pose tough questions to, and it's not just going to be after they met with top regulators just a few weeks ago, and we'll meet again this week to talk about the ways that this problem can be avoided going forward. But they are going to be very clear in their questioning here to the banking CEOs, many of whom feel have been given too much free rein and need to be reined in.
I mean, these executives, they've been criticized for failing to address really risk management issues that were previously flagged by regulators. So that's probably almost certainly going to come up in the hearing today.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea how these former execs are going to respond to all that?
Yeah, in part, we know that some of them are coming with a more apologetic tone. All of them have been with the banks that they were part of for many years. And so they're expected to focus on the families that they let down, the households that they let down, as well as the household names, in the words of one of these statements that we've gotten an early look at. And it does present the idea that they may go more of the emotional route, while senators will go more of the regulation and financial route, which of course makes sense in terms of appealing your defense in front of the American public. But nevertheless, the concern on Capitol Hill that's been permeating over these last few weeks, Joe, around the idea that more banks could collapse, even as they're beginning to negotiate these debt ceiling deals, all of these things are linked together in the mind of lawmakers. And so you're likely to see one issue bleed into the other in this hearing as well, as we talk about the general landscape of the American economy right now, with these banking presidents and CEOs who have been on the more negative end of it in recent weeks, as they've been the banks that have failed.
Allie, one more quick question while we have you. The House Financial Services Committee is set to hear from top federal bank regulators today. That's a separate hearing. What are we watching for there?
Yeah, similar themes that we saw when the Senate Banking Committee had top regulators before them. This is a conversation about not only what went wrong from regulators' perspectives, but what they can do going forward from a legislative perspective to make sure that something like this, the banking collapses that we've seen in recent weeks, especially for medium-sized banks, can be regulated against, and that the economy can be shored up against, so that we don't do this a few months from now, a few years from now. It's bad for everybody if that happens.
Most definitely. All right, Allie, thank you for everything this morning. As always, we appreciate your reporting and context for everything. Let's stick in Washington, but head to the Supreme Court, where justices have agreed to weigh in on a case that is tied to former President Trump. This is a long-running legal battle. Some Democratic lawmakers want to get their hands on documents that are related to the ownership of the former Trump International Hotel in Washington. Now, Trump has said he handed over day-to-day control of the hotel to his two eldest sons during his presidency. 17 congressional Democrats first tried to sue the federal government over the documents. In 2017, they cited a potential conflict of interest caused by Trump leasing the building while he was president, saying that raised ethical questions. NBC News legal analyst Ali Ceballos, just kidding, Danny Ceballos, joins us now to break down this case. So, I mean, Danny, this is a complicated one. The big picture issue has always been, did people stay in this hotel to curry favor with the president? But this really isn't even, we're not even there yet. This is really just some Democrats trying to get this process going. Why is it they're suing? Why has this taken so long?
You bring up such a good point. Let's say these members of Congress prevail and they get the documents. This is information from 2016. The president they were investigating is no longer even the president, although he might be the president again. So this is really very similar to what's called a FOIA request. Any one of us, not just members of Congress, can write on a piece of paper to an executive branch or an executive agency and say, we would like some documents. Now, what the agency does with that, whether they deny it or they stick it in a file cabinet and get to it in 5 years, that's another question. But there's a 1928 law that allows a minority 7 members of the House to make this kind of request. And what happened was the GSA, the General Services Administration, actually treated it like a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request. And they turned over most of the documents that they were looking for. But this appeal really is about fleshing out the contours of this 1928 law and what can be requested. Originally, the district court, the lowest court, said these members don't have standing because they're saying they're injured, but they're saying they're injured as members of Congress. And that's not really an injury. But the appeals court said, no, that's not how it works. If this is like a Freedom of Information Act request, then these members of Congress are harmed just the way you and I are harmed when the government denies our Freedom of Information Act request. And I actually litigate FOIA requests. I file suit on them when and if an agency refuses the documents that I'm requesting. So the Circuit Court of Appeals, I think, got it right because, yes, there is standing, because what standing could there be if you can't sue when the government doesn't give you the documents that you're requesting?
So this is no longer the Trump administration. It's now the Biden administration. What's stopping them from just handing over these documents to the Democrats?
It's such an awkward situation where the next administration has to enforce something that an administration before it that they may totally disagree with. They have a difficult policy decision to make. So for whatever reason, the Biden administration has decided they are going to try and enforce this or carry on what the Trump administration did in opposing or carrying on this litigation. So that is a political decision to make. debate, but it is important to flesh out what are the limits of these laws, whether it be FOIA or this 1928 law that forces the government to hand over documents. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased, but I think Freedom of Information Act requests are so important, especially to journalists like you, to get information from a government that wouldn't otherwise be willing to come forward and voluntarily hand it over. Although I suspect that these members of Congress got their FOIA requests looked at a lot faster than you and I when we send them in to a government agency. I'm sure you have experience with that.
I wonder why that would be. Real quickly here, if the Democrats do get these documents, then what could happen? Could this be more legal trouble for the former president?
Maybe, but here's what we're talking about. We're talking about documents, most of which they've already gotten. Whatever the remainder is, maybe something dramatic, but at best it will tell us what that hotel, which is no longer even a Trump hotel.
It's a Waldorf Astoria.
It's now. Yes, it's a Waldorf Astoria. And now we'll find out, I guess, what folks were doing in that hotel in 2016, and whether or not maybe they were trying to curry favor with a president who's no longer even the president.
All right, Danny Savalos helping us break down this complicated issue. We appreciate it. Thank you. At least 3 people were killed, 6 others injured in a shooting in New Mexico. Police say the gunman suspected of carrying out the attack was, quote, confronted and killed on the scene. Officials say he was 18 years old and had multiple weapons. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has the latest.
Shooting off about 50 shots, possibly still going on.
Gunfire erupting Monday morning in Farmington, New Mexico, about 200 miles northwest of Santa Fe.
I have eyes on the suspect. He's walking south. He's wearing all black. He's got automatic weapon.
Where police saying the suspect roamed through an area of up to a quarter of a mile, firing at least 3 different weapons, including an AR-15.
At this point, it appears to be purely random. At least 6 houses and 3 cars were shot in the course of the event as a suspect randomly fired at whatever entered his head to shoot at.
3 people were killed and 6 others injured, including 2 police officers, now in stable condition. The 18-year-old suspect seen here before he was shot and killed by police. The governor and mayor praising law enforcement, saying it took just 5 minutes to stop the shooter, adding that quick response likely saved countless lives. Jolene Robledo was home with her baby daughter when she heard the shots.
And it went from pop, pop, pop to pop, 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 pop. And I freaked out because I knew then that it was gunshots, and I just grabbed my daughter. We just barricaded in between the washer and the dryer.
Her 1-year-old's bedroom window and wall pierced by bullets. 5 Democratic lawmakers from New Mexico issuing a joint statement saying, in part, today is a painful reminder that we must do more. We are committed to fighting for sensible gun safety measures that will keep New Mexicans safe. There have been 225 mass shootings in 2023 alone, according to the Gun Violence Archive, which includes any shooting with at least 4 victims. This morning, another community in the U.S. left reeling.
It's heartbreaking for the victims, absolutely heartbreaking for the victims who are just going about their everyday life.
Our thanks to Aaron McLaughlin for that report. Police have not released the identities of the victims or the suspect, and so far have not indicated what the teenage gunman's motive may have been. This morning, we are learning new details about an attack at a congressman's office in Virginia. Officials say a man with a metal baseball bat entered the office of Congressman Jerry Connolly, then assaulted 2 people on his staff, including an intern. It was her first day on the job. Police say both victims have been released from the hospital. The suspect has been identified as Juan Catron Pham. Now, he is in custody and faces a couple charges, including aggravated malicious wounding. Police say it is unclear what the motive may have been for that attack. The Mid-Atlantic is gearing up for severe weather today. Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather meteorologist Angie Lastman joins us with that. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hey there, Joe. Good morning. We've got some showers and some thunderstorms that are already working through parts of the Ohio Valley and headed into the Mid-Atlantic later today. And we have some flooding concerns that we'll be watching through the day today, as well as those severe storms that you mentioned. Let's talk about exactly where the heaviest of the rain is right now. Southern portions of Indiana and Illinois, stretching into parts of Missouri as well. But again, this is going to start to shift to the east. So we'll have a widespread area area that could see some heavy and really impressive rainfall rates here by the time this is all said and done. Notice the areas that are going to have that slight risk for flash flooding today. That does include Lexington, Louisville, Evansville. Even places like St. Louis could see some of this flash flooding extending out towards the East Coast as well. Localized amounts of up to 3 inches, so no surprise that we could see some concerns for that flooding through the day today. Here's the other amounts that we could expect. It does extend down into parts of the southeast over the next day or so, where we could pick up another half an inch, or even up to, again, 3 inches by the time this system starts to work its way out to the east. With that, we'll also see the potential for some strong storms to develop, and they could become severe. We'll have all hazards on deck for this. That means that the 10 million people included in these shaded areas, that has the folks there have the potential to see most likely the strong wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour, but also large hail is a possibility up to 1 inch. And we aren't going to rule out a couple of tornadoes too, and it extends in that same kind of area. So not just the heavy rain threat, but also the potential for some of these stronger storms. Let's switch gears and talk temperatures, because we've got some changes on the way, and it does include places that have been running really warm for the past couple of days. Still going to head to the low 80s in New York today, but as we get into tomorrow, temperatures start to drop. Will now be below normal. Places like Philly will hit the upper 60s. Binghamton ends up at 53 degrees, running 14 degrees below normal for this time of year. And do not forget the jackets on Thursday morning. You'll need them. Temperatures in places like Buffalo, 35 degrees. We could see some frost advisories with this. We could also see a couple of record lows being broken, and temperatures into the low 40s for places like Boston. Spring will be spring, Joe.
You know, it couldn't stick around with summer weather forever,
Exactly.
I suppose, right? All right. Thanks, Angie. Appreciate it. The results are in after a 4-year investigation into the FBI's decision to examine possible ties between Russia and Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. The 300-page report was released yesterday by special counsel John Durham. In it, he criticizes the FBI, accusing the agency of acting negligently by opening the investigation based on vague and insufficient information. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now with more on this. So, Ken, pretty damning report here by special counsel Durham. Walk us through some of his key findings and key criticisms.
Good morning, Joe. I would say it was damning in its language, but not necessarily in its conclusions. Durham criticized the FBI. He repeated a lot of criticisms that have been aired for years now about the way they handled some of the evidence and the way they pursued some national security warrants in that Trump-Russia investigation. But he never came out and said that the FBI should not have opened that investigation, which they did after a Trump aide, if you recall, told an Australian diplomat that the Russians had offered to help the Trump campaign by releasing damaging information about his opponent, Hillary Rodham Clinton. But Durham does spend 300 pages really lambasting the FBI for being too credulous about evidence that was brought potentially from Clinton supporters, and for not carefully considering its actions in opening this major investigation into a political campaign. But his investigation contradicted the findings of the Department of Justice Inspector General, which decided back in 2019, after looking at this whole matter, that the FBI was in fact justified in opening this investigation. Both investigations found no evidence of political bias, Joe.
So what's the FBI's response to all this? And also, how is the former president responding?
Right. So the FBI is saying, look, we made changes years ago in response to that IG investigation that I mentioned. They've essentially overhauled how they're handling national security investigations. They've made a number of changes, and they say that if those reforms had been in place in 2016, a lot of these missteps wouldn't have happened. Trump, of course, the former president, is proclaiming that this report vindicates his longstanding view that he was framed by the so-called deep state, that the American public was scammed. That's not at all what this report says. In fact, this report does not vindicate what Trump has been claiming. John Durham found no corruption, no conspiracy, and no evidence that the FBI acted with political bias, Joe.
So the ramifications here are likely far more political than legal, even though this was a special counsel investigation. I mean, looking forward, Ken, what are the possible implications of this report?
No, you're absolutely right, Joe. And what's interesting about this is it's not just Trump Republicans, but Republicans of all stripes are very skeptical about the FBI right now. It's an interesting time in American politics. Usually the Republicans are the law and order party. And this report plays right into that. And that can make the job of every FBI agent harder, whether they're investigating fraud, bank robberies, or terrorist plots, Joe.
All right. Ken Delanian. Ken, thank you so much.
You bet.
Overnight in Ukraine, Russia launched a new air attack on the capital, Kyiv. Ukrainian officials say they shot down all the missiles, which are said to have included multiple hypersonic missiles. There were no casualties reported. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from Kyiv. Molly, good to have you with us. Tell us more about this attack and how Ukraine's air defenses held up, especially against those hypersonic missiles.
Yeah, Joe, good to be with you. And they held up big picture very, very well if you ask the Ukrainian Air Force this morning. So just to run you through what we saw and what we heard last night, it was actually my first night in town around 3 a.m. We were all woken up to these explosions, to these thuds, which were interceptions. The Air Force this morning, Joe, ran us through the numbers. They say 18 missiles total from the north, south, east, and west. 6 hypersonic Kinzhal missiles launched by aircraft. Those are the hypersonic, really some of the most modern missiles in Moscow's arsenal that you just mentioned. 9 cruise missiles launched from the Black Sea, 3 land-based missiles, and 9 drones. Again, these Kinzhal hypersonic missiles that were launched from aircraft, these are missiles that Moscow has bragged about, that they have spoken about in the last couple of years as impossible to intercept. Now, the Ukrainian Air Force has not been specific about what parts of their air defense systems shot down which weapons and which missiles this morning, but we do know the American Patriot air defense systems, which were delivered last month, Joe, are a key part and very strategic part of Ukraine's air defenses that kept this capital city safe overnight.
And Molly, I mean, this latest attack comes as President Zelensky really wraps up his Europe tour, which was aimed at shoring up military support. We know he met with Britain's prime minister yesterday. Fighter jets, one of the main issues that were discussed there, right?
Yeah, and it was also kind of the top agenda item when he visited the UK back in February, a visit I covered, Joe, when President Zelensky also met with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. They have been pounding away at this issue of fighter jets to Ukraine for the last several months. But take a quick listen to both President Zelensky and the Prime Minister yesterday in their press conference, and I'll talk to you on the back end.
We spoke about the jets, very important topic for us because we can't control the sky. We want to create this jets coalition, and I'm very positive with it.
One thing we will be doing, starting actually relatively soon, is training of Ukrainian pilots. We're ready to implement those plans in relatively short order, which will mean that we're training Ukrainian citizens to become absolutely combat-ready aircraft pilots.
And, Joe, training, of course, one piece of this very important puzzle to President Zelensky. And actually, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, gave an interview to a French outlet where he also suggested solidarity with Rishi Sunak's plan. He says, we have also opened the door to training pilots alongside several other European countries, which are also ready. I believe the negotiations with the Americans are ongoing. And, Joe, just to be very clear, it is no accident that President Zelensky pushes the UK so hard. The UK has really been out in front, been a leader, and one that European countries and the Americans have followed in the last year and a half.
And Molly, on top of the fighter jets, we understand Britain is also supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles. Explain to us why that is so important and how the Kremlin's responding.
That's exactly right. And again, they have been out in front. They have been a leader among NATO allies and Western allies, providing Ukraine with really the most modern technology. So what we know yesterday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced long-range attack drones with a range of more than 200 kilometers, about 125 miles. And that actually, Joe, comes on the heels of the delivery of the Storm Shadow cruise missiles, which have a range of more than 250 kilometers, about 155 miles. These are the kind of ranges that the Ukrainians have been asking Western allies, have been asking the UK for since the beginning of the war, and they say this is what is going to make the difference, especially in that battle that we have been following so closely down in Bakhmut. As you can imagine, the Kremlin and the Russian Foreign Ministry very unhappy about this. Actually, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov spoke about this yesterday. He says, we take this news extremely negatively, Joe. I think that's probably an understatement. He says, I repeat, this cannot have any significant or fundamental impact on the course of this special military operation. This leads to further retaliatory actions and so on, which means that for Ukraine, this makes the situation much more complicated, Joe. It is no surprise, it is no coincidence that the capital city saw its biggest Russian attack in weeks last night.
All right, and Molly Hunter just arriving there in Kyiv. Thank you for your reporting. Please stay safe. Now for other headlines from around the world this morning, starting with more on that devastating cyclone that hit Myanmar. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome with that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. At least 6 people have so far died and another 700 were injured after this powerful cyclone made landfall in Myanmar on Monday. Another 1,000 people trapped by seawater 12 feet deep had to be evacuated by rescuers. By midday on Monday, Cyclone Mocha weakened to a tropical depression, but the water did not recede fast enough, and many areas along the coastline remain flooded under 5 feet of water. The search and rescue continues. Now let's go to Ecuador, where on Tuesday, lawmakers started the procedure to impeach and remove the president, Guillermo Lasso, who is accused of embezzlement. This is the second time the opposition tries to impeach the president, but last year it didn't get enough votes. The president denies the allegations moved against him and may try instead to dissolve parliament and govern by decree until the next presidential elections. And finally, let's head to Spain, where an Irish firefighter and a rescue team happened to be in the right place at the right time. They were heading to Malaga airport after attending a conference in Seville when on the highway they saw a motorcyclist lying on the road after a collision with a car. They stopped the car, blocked off part of the road and turned into professional firefighters and paramedics. The patient is now in intensive care and is recovering, but had it not been for the team who arrived by chance within 60 seconds of the collision, he may have died from his injuries. Now, just imagine how grateful that motorcyclist must be, Joe.
He must be incredibly grateful. All right, Claudio, thanks for bringing us that story. We appreciate it. We are back with our weekly mental health check-in. This week, we're taking a closer look at the impact of activism on younger generations. Plus, inflation might be creeping down, but Americans are still stressed over money. This morning, we have tips on how to manage that anxiety. Let's bring in psychotherapist Nero Feliciano for more on these headlines. She's also the author of This Book Won't Make You Happy, but we are happy to have Nero with us. Good morning. Let's start out with activism burnout. So in 2020, we remember millions of people took to the streets to protest a number of issues, from police brutality to racism. Of course, COVID was going on right then. But just 1 year later now, 60% of students say their advocacy work is harming their mental health. So what's leading to this burnout? Is there a way to be an advocate without sacrificing your mental health?
Absolutely, Joe. One thing we know is protests bring up negative emotions. It creates a very polarizing situation in that we feel like we have to win this battle. It creates a lot of hatred towards the opponent or the organization that we're protesting. So if we're feeling burned out, if we're feeling apathetic in trying to help the situation in this way, there is an answer, and that is actually volunteering. So instead of just voicing our opposition, we can think of how can we actually help the situation. For example, instead of protesting issues that affect the homeless, go and volunteer at a place that benefits the homeless, a soup kitchen. Instead of just voicing opposition towards a certain political leader, help people get to the polls, drive them there, help them access transportation. And we know giving back through connection releases the trifecta of happiness hormones, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. So certainly will improve our mental health and help us prevent burnout.
Let's talk about the economy. A new survey from Bankrate found 52% of people listed money as their biggest concern that takes a toll on their mental health. So how can we handle this stress of an uncertain economy?
Definitely a stressor, not just personally for mental health, but also in relationships. One, we want to ask the question, is this a problem I need to solve today? Because often the anxiety puts us in a worst case scenario. Think about, what can I do today to make a difference? Maybe it's focusing on savings. Maybe it's talking to someone who can help us financially plan. We have to look at what we can control versus what we can't control. And that brings down some of the anxiety when we know that we actually have advocacy in this situation. And talk to someone who's good with managing money. Talk to someone who can help you. Make the time to think about a plan that involves short-term and long-term steps. And that, again, brings it back to our control and should alleviate some of that anxiety.
You mentioned relationships. Let's talk specifically about friendships. For many, that's the most important bond in their life, but it doesn't mean it comes without drama. Some people even experience something known as friendship anxiety. So what exactly does that look like, and how can we better our friendships so there is no anxiety involved?
Joe, most important determinant of our well-being is our connection. And anxiety around friendships can be twofold. And what I like to say is it a me problem or is it a you problem? First of all, we have to see what's triggering us. Are we worried about friends not being there for us or criticizing us or judging us? That might be our own self-esteem issue. We have to challenge the negative thoughts that we're having in that situation. If our friends are friends that drain us, if we feel like we're being used by them, that necessitates setting boundaries, really evaluating that friendship and thinking, is this the best thing for me? How do I feel when I spend time with them? Maybe that even involves investing time with other friends and letting go of some friendships that aren't healthy.
All right, Nero Feliciano, making us happy this morning and giving us some good advice. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It is never too late to walk on that graduation stage. 2 World War II veterans are proving just that after missing their own ceremonies many years ago to serve our country. NBC's Aaron Gilchrist has that story.
In a procession of teenage tassels, pomp, and circumstance, one graduating senior at Halstead High School in Kansas stands out.
Yeah, big honor for anybody, but especially me.
Senior citizen Wilbur Nachtigal is 95. He was set to graduate in the class of 1946, but service to his country in World War II called him away from his home in Kansas.
The war was on. Wanted to be a part of the war.
Wilbur joined the Marines, missing out on his chance to finish his high school education and walk across this stage. Also missing out on his college graduation 8 decades ago in Iowa.
Mr. Taylor, would you come on up to stage?
Centenarian Fred Taylor, another member of the Greatest Generation.
Fred left Cornell College in February of 1943 to serve our country flying fighter planes during World War II. 80 years later, he is, at this very moment, taking the steps to finish what he never got the opportunity to do, to be on this stage.
Fred sharing this message to the younger Cornell College graduates.
Get into the career that you really like and do your best and stick with it and be kind to other people.
8 decades after the class of 1943 commencement he missed, we are very proud to officially present Mr. Frederick Taylor with his Cornell College degree.
Halstead High School is now able to award a diploma to Mr. Wilbur Nachtigal as a 2023 graduate of Halstead High School.
As Wilbur rolls up to his graduation, the ceremony a surprise to his family.
It was wonderful. It meant a lot to him. He called us all up. He told us about it, and he said, "Hey, I'm graduating." And we're like, "Wait, what?"
Like all Halstead High School graduates, Wilbur got a standard issue graduation photo holding his diploma, but also this special shot. Wilbur overjoyed to share this moment with 3 generations of his family.
This is really something special. I didn't expect this much, and I'm very proud that they gave that much to me.
Our thanks to Aaron Gilchrist for that story. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs says of the 16 million Americans who served in World War II, nearly 200,000 are still alive as of last year. Now for your financial headlines. Part of the NFL postseason is heading to streaming. CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other money headlines. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. That's right. So the NFL strikes a 1-year deal with NBC Universal to carry a playoff game exclusively on Peacock this season. The game will be in primetime on Saturday, January 13th, and that's during wildcard weekend. Playoffs games have been streamed before, but this is the first time one will only be available through streaming. The markets of the 2 teams in the game will be able to watch on a local station. Peacock has been spending heavily on sports to drive growth and currently shows Premier League soccer, college football, Major League Baseball, and the Olympics. Amazon plans to add a search product similar to ChatGPT to its online store, rivaling efforts by Google and Microsoft to integrate AI features into their search engines. Bloomberg reports that Amazon's ambitions have appeared in recent job postings for engineers. Conversational search could reshape Amazon's core retail business. More than half of shoppers say they start product searches on Amazon. That's a higher share than Google. Business lunches are coming back. And it's a signal that some pre-pandemic habits are returning to normal. Data from OpenTable shows the number of seated diners at noon on weekdays increased every month between January and April versus last year. Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, and Atlanta also saw gains. And Google searches for business lunch have hit their highest level in the past decade in recent months. And OpenTable says overall dining demand remains relatively stable, Joe.
You know, interestingly, I talked to a bartender recently who said Fridays and Saturdays are kind of dead, but Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are just big
so what does that tell you?
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Thanks, Silvana. Appreciate it. Memorial Day weekend is around the corner. AAA is predicting nearly 43 million people will be packing their bags for some holiday travel. So what do you need to know to make sure you're ready to hit the road? Going travel expert Katie Nastro is joining us to make sure we have everything we need to know before taking off. Katie, good morning. So I'm guessing this is more of a driving holiday over a flying holiday. What are your best tips for people as they get set to hit the road for Memorial Day weekend?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we are definitely going to see an unprecedented amount of people traveling, whether they're hitting the friendly skies or hitting the road. For road travelers specifically, this is actually some good news, a bit of good news for your wallet. Gas prices are down about 21% versus last year. And they are actually expected to become cheaper as we go into the summer. So this is really good news if you're looking for a really long road trip that you've been kind of putting off, because we remember those sticker shocking prices that we saw last summer. So this is good news, definitely to report. So anyone looking to hit the road, don't worry, your wallet can be thankful.
That is some good news. So I feel like as we've emerged from the worst of the pandemic, every year travel numbers seem to go up during these key holidays. How about this year? How many more people are going to be traveling this Memorial Day weekend compared with last Memorial Day weekend?
Sure. You know, we're anticipating the highest number of travelers that we've seen since maybe even pre-pandemic. And I'm not a betting woman, but I would say that this might even break some records. I know that AAA is expecting an 11% increase in air travelers versus last year, and then a 5.5% percentage increase since 2019. So again, really going to be a record-breaking, or expected to be a record-breaking year. And you know, when you're looking at TSA numbers alone, we're seeing day-to-day numbers nearly identical to 2019. But if you combine the first 4 months of 2023, look at that sum versus 2019, we've actually already surpassed 2019 numbers, and that's during a low season. So if it's trending in that upward direction, we're definitely going to be expecting from Memorial Day onwards a lot of travelers about.
People want to get out. So, you know, it's a week and a half away. I'm guessing most people have made their plans, maybe not everyone. So for those who are still trying to figure it out, any tips for last-minute travelers? Are there any deals out there you can snag?
Sure. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You know, the best deals that we saw were really available a few months ago, but I can commiserate with anyone who waits till the last minute. You're busy, things happen. I myself should take my own advice and book a little bit sooner. But for anyone who hasn't booked yet, there are some deals to be had. For instance, New York down to Charleston, 188 round trip. Or maybe you want to hit that island life and head out to Bermuda, 320 round trip from New York. And this is actually a great time to get to Bermuda before that humidity really sets in. Yeah. Maybe you want to go from Dallas over to Vegas, 218 round trip. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle of the country. Maybe you're in Denver. You want to go to New York City, which is a fabulous time of the year, you know, 178 round trip to hit the Big Apple. So there are definitely deals to be had, but the biggest piece of advice, definitely book sooner than later. A day out, a ticket purchased a day out versus a week out, definitely more expensive. So you do not want to wait.
Always some good advice there. And I can tell you the tourists are definitely back here in New York right now. All right, Katie Nastro, thank you so much. Appreciate your tips. Welcome back. She is already an entrepreneur, kitchen icon, friend of Snoop Dogg. Well, now at age 81, Martha Stewart can add another title, swimwear model. Stewart just became the oldest woman to pose for the swimsuit cover of Sports Illustrated. She was given 3 months to get ready for this suit, said she did Pilates and avoided a few plates of pasta. She broke the news to our friends on the Today Show, later calling it an opportunity of a lifetime on her Instagram page, writing, "My motto has always been, when you're through changing, you're through." Stewart is one of 4 cover stars for this year's magazine annual swimsuit edition, along with Megan Fox, Kim Petras, and Brooks Nader. Congratulations to all of them, and to Martha Stewart for inspiring so many with that. Finally this hour, if you are planning to move into a new home, whether that be down the street or maybe across the country, we have some inspiration for you. This year's U.S. News and World Report rankings of the best places to live in the U.S. is out. Here to reveal that list for us is U.S. News and Report real estate editor and expert Devin Thorsby. Devin, good to have you with us. So before we reveal this year's best places to live, tell us how you put together these rankings.
The best places to live considers the factors people consider most important when it comes to finding the right fit for their next hometown. So we look at affordability, overall quality of life, desirability, whether people want to move there and actually are moving there, as well as the job market.
So let's not keep folks waiting anymore. Tell us, what are, in your mind, the best places to live in the U.S.? Do we see any major changes this year, say, compared with last year's top 10?
We do see some changes, and we have a new number 1 this year. At number 5, we have Sarasota, Florida. Number 4 is Boulder, Colorado, which in past years has been number 1 itself. Number 3 is Raleigh and Durham, North Carolina. Number 2 is Huntsville, Alabama, which was number 1 last year. And number 1 this year, which might be a surprise to some people, is Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Wow, I've lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I didn't know that was going to be number 1 on the list. What are the main reasons Green Bay is number 1?
Green Bay offers a lot of affordability, which is a big deal for a lot of people, especially if they're planning to move across the country. That and the fact that it offers a lot of quality of life. People are happy living in Green Bay. And while the weather might deter some people, I think if you don't like cold winters, don't move to Green Bay. But the people who do live there seem to like it a lot and don't mind getting out in winter.
You do get that cold weather coming off of Lake Michigan. But I will say, though it has been a very long time, I had a great apartment there. It was only like $600 a month at the time. So not a bad bargain at all. All right. So there were other rankings put together by U.S. News, including the safest places to live and the most affordable. Where should we be looking there?
In the safest category, which is based on data we look at from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the top 5 actually includes 4, I think, Florida metro areas. So that's number 1 is Naples, Florida, followed by Port St. Lucie, Florida, Fort Myers, Florida. At number 4, we have Portland, Maine, and then Lakeland, Florida.
So what role did the economy, especially right now, where we're sort of in this period dealing with inflation, uncertainty about a recession, how did that play into the rankings this year?
As part of affordability, we have always looked at housing costs. So the median rent or mortgage payments combined with the cost of property taxes and utilities. And because inflation has impacted everyone across the U.S. this year, we also wanted to look at how the cost of goods and services compare to other metro areas. So we incorporated that price parity as well, which has affected to some extent the affordability rankings.
We just have 15 seconds here, but I know you surveyed Americans. What were just the most important qualities they were looking for?
Affordability is a big one, as well as quality of life. I think especially post-pandemic, people want to make sure that they're going to be happy where they live.
All right, Devin Thorsby, thanks so much. By the way, if you're going to move to Green Bay, you have to be a Packers fan, because that is definitely a priority there. All right, thanks, Devin. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now. Stay with us. The news continues right now. Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off today. Right now on Morning News Now, final report. After 4 years, we are getting our first look at the Trump-era special counsel investigation, looking into the origins of the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation. The Bureau facing serious criticism that it acted without evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, how the FBI is responding, and the reaction from both sides of the aisle. Baseball bat attack. One man is under arrest after a brutal assault on the office of a U.S. congressman. The attack sending 2 staffers to the hospital, one of them an intern on her first day. What we've learned about the suspect's background and the new video showing the disturbing moments before the attack. Border slowdown. After reaching record levels, the swell of migrants along the southern border is easing, with illegal crossings dropping by nearly half. But with processing centers being pushed to the max, communities are struggling to keep up. We are on the ground with the impact being felt across the country. And sorry, not sorry, there is a growing push for women to stop over apologizing.
I apologized to coffee tables I bumped into and then laughed when I realized it. Some friends tell me to stop apologizing so much. Inevitably, I reply, I know, I'm sorry.
Not everyone is on board, so what experts say is behind the verbal tick and why it can sometimes kick things off on the wrong foot for all of us. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday. We begin this hour with that report by special counsel John Durham looking into the FBI's probe, which looked into potential ties between Russia and former President Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. The report accused the FBI of acting negligently by opening the investigation based on insufficient and vague information, but it did not produce any blockbuster revelations of criminal conduct. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dateline joins us now with more on this. Ken, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. In this 306-page report, special counsel John Durham excoriates the FBI for what he says is being too credulous with accepting information that some of which came from politically tainted sources, including that infamous Steele dossier, and also just not thoroughly vetting some of the information that it used to open this counterintelligence investigation that blossomed into the Trump-Russia investigation conducted by special counsel Robert Mueller. But as you said, this report did not live up to what former President Trump said that it would. He called it the crime of the century. He expected that people were going to go to jail over this. Really, only 2 criminal cases were brought by this special counsel, and both resulted in acquittals by juries. And no major allegations of corruption, conspiracy, or even acting with political bias were brought by the special counsel against the FBI. Everyone acknowledges the FBI made mistakes in this investigation. That was the conclusion of a 2019 Inspector General report. The FBI saying it made a lot of changes since then, and that some of these missteps could not happen today, Joe.
You put together a report on this. Let's take a look at that package right now.
This morning, the investigation that followed a political firestorm around the 2016 election.
A horrible, horrible, disgusting witch hunt.
Finally wrapping up ahead of the next one. Republicans saying it exposed serious wrongdoing by the FBI.
The FBI has an awful lot of work to do.
While Democrats calling it a rehash that didn't live up to its billing.
The investigation, the investigators by Durham revealed little to nothing.
Mr. Trump on his Truth Social website saying the American public was scammed. But the report, though highly critical of the FBI, did not back up Mr. Trump's claims that he was framed by a corrupt deep state conspiracy.
I think it's a political crime of the century.
In fact, special counsel John Durham did not find corruption or even actions motivated by politics. Durham was tapped by Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, to look into whether FBI officials abused their powers when they opened an investigation in 2016, codenamed Crossfire Hurricane, looking into allegations the Trump campaign had colluded with the Russian government. That eventually led to the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller, who in the end did not find a conspiracy between Trump and the Kremlin.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Although Mueller did find a Trump campaign eager to accept help from Russians. Durham's report criticized what he called seriously deficient mistakes by the FBI, adding the Bureau was much more cautious and skeptical about allegations against the Clinton campaign. All potential fodder for Trump as he mounts another campaign for president.
And Joe, the FBI said in a statement that they've made a number of changes to the way they approach national security investigations that would prevent some of these missteps from happening again. And there's also a new rule that says the Attorney General has to approve any investigation into a national political campaign. Joe.
All right, Ken Dateline. And Ken, thank you so much. Turning now to that violent baseball bat attack in Virginia. A man wielding a metal bat assaulted 2 staffers at the office of Congressman Jerry Connolly. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us from Fairfax, Virginia with the latest on this. Ryan, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. And we do have good news. Those two staffers who were injured in the attack yesterday have both been released from the hospital. Their boss, Jerry Connolly, telling us that he believes that they will recover from their physical injuries. But what he is worried about is the trauma that they experienced in this office here behind me.
Someone has been struck with a bat.
This morning, police are trying to determine why a man entered Democratic Congressman Jerry Connolly's Virginia office and attacked two of his staffers with a metal baseball bat. The same man, police believe, is seen in this new surveillance footage, chasing another woman nearby just minutes earlier. Authorities say the suspect then showed up at Connolly's office, looking for the lawmaker. And when he learned the congressman wasn't there, he went off, hitting two of Connolly's staffers.
One of the staffers who was injured, she's an intern, and today was her first day.
The staffers treated and released at a local hospital.
You could absolutely tell that the people inside were scared. They were hiding.
Federal investigators searching the home of 49-year-old suspect, Juan Ka Tran Pham, who has a history of run-ins with police. In 2022, court documents show he was charged with assaulting and attempting to disarm an officer during what prosecutors described as a mental health crisis. The charges were later dropped when Pham complied with treatment. Pham also filed a $29 million handwritten lawsuit against the CIA last year, claiming he'd been wrongfully imprisoned and alleging he'd been, quote, brutally tortured from the fourth dimension. This latest assault comes as attacks against members of Congress and their families have skyrocketed. Just last month, Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger telling lawmakers the number of threats had increased 400% over the last 6 years.
I worry about the normalization of violence in our politics. I've got a strong and resilient staff. They're committed to their mission, and they're not going to be deterred by this kind of tragic incident.
And Congressman Connolly now says that he and his office will review security here in their district. He's already working with Capitol Police to try and find fixes for what happened here yesterday. He said that he's worried not only for the safety of his staff, but for the general public who enter into these doors every single day. Joe?
All right, Ryan, thank you so much. Now the latest on the standoff over the debt ceiling in Washington. We are just weeks away from a potentially crippling debt default if no deal is reached on Capitol Hill. President Biden is expected to host a crucial meeting today at the White House with congressional leaders with the hopes of reaching an agreement. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen issued a new warning yesterday saying the U.S. could still default as soon as June 1st. NBC News senior congressional correspondent Garrett Hake joins us now with the latest on all this. Garrett, good morning to you. So just remind us, where do we stand on negotiations as we head into this critical meeting today?
Joe, I've never been less excited to get to June and the summer because right now it seems like they're still basically nowhere. Lawmakers and the president are hoping to get in a room today and decide on at least the parameters for negotiation that the White House says still isn't even a negotiation. Now, Kevin McCarthy, every time he spoke to reporters yesterday, seemed less and less optimistic about the state of things. I want to play for you some of what he told us yesterday and then give you the White House's view of things on the other side. Here's McCarthy.
The only body in all of Congress are the Republicans who raised the debt ceiling. And we did it way in advance before Janet Yellen told us when the deadline was, because we didn't want to be here. So no, I don't think we're in a good place. I know we're not.
Now, President Biden has been much more publicly optimistic about this, but the White House and the lawmakers close to the process have basically said these negotiations, discussions, whatever you want to call them, have begun to center around just a couple things, making permitting for things like energy and infrastructure projects a little bit easier, spending caps on future spending, and maybe trying to claw back some unspent pandemic money. That may be what this all comes down to at the end of the day, Joe.
So, Garrett, as we've reported, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrote another letter to Congress yesterday, basically reiterating the same point. The U.S. could default on its debt obligations in a couple weeks from Thursday. Remind us what's at stake here. And also, this really isn't a situation where they could reach a deal on May 31st and everything's hunky-dory, right?
No, that's right. I mean, it's going to take some time to pass into law whatever deal gets reached. So you got to almost back time this by a week or two to be sure that you don't accidentally stumble across that deadline. And this is different than a government shutdown. The effects here could be far more wide-ranging. First of all, you'd see delayed payments for things like Social Security checks, veterans benefits, your tax return money. If you haven't gotten it yet, don't expect it after June 1st if we're in default. You'd also see interest rate spikes that could hurt you if you're trying to buy a car or build a house, and then your retirement savings would take a hit, as would, frankly, the rest of the markets. So we've never been in this situation before, Joe. There's almost like a bias against even thinking about how bad it could be. But that's the reality, according to economists across the political spectrum.
And Garrett, NBC News has learned Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be part of today's meeting at the White House. That's according to a source familiar with her plans. What should we know about her role today? Does that tell us anything about this process right now?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things we've heard from the Republicans involved in this process is they'd like to see the negotiating group get smaller, not bigger. They think that would be helpful in coming to an actual deal. But what our White House folks are saying, what the sources they're talking to are saying, is that the vice president's getting involved in part so she could be a more active participant in the messaging around this issue, kind of laying out the risks, the necessity of reaching some kind of deal, of raising the debt ceiling, particularly while the president's out of the country, which is a trip that's supposed to begin tomorrow, Joe, and nobody knows exactly whether he'll still go or for how long, to Japan and to Australia if these negotiations that may or may not be negotiations heat up or get stuck. The president could be needed back here in the States to push this thing across the finish line, too.
Yeah, a lot of White House journalists are wondering if they're about to embark on a long overseas trip or if they're just going to stay in Washington.
It's a mileage run to nowhere, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Garrett, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Turning now to the war in Ukraine, Russia carried out another wave of airstrikes on Kyiv overnight, but Ukrainian officials say they shot down all the missiles and drones. This latest attack comes after President Zelensky wrapped up his European tour. As he wraps that tour up, NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from Kyiv. Molly, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. And not just another wave, according to Ukrainian officials, the biggest attack on the capital in weeks, 18 missiles in all. And as you say this morning, the Ukrainian Air Force, they say their air defenses, which include an American-supplied Patriot defense system, shot down every single missile.
Overnight, a massive wave of Russian attacks aimed at Ukraine's capital, the biggest in weeks. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia targeted Kyiv with at least 18 missiles from the north, south, and east. And Ukraine's air defense systems shooting down even the most advanced Russian weapons, including 6 hypersonic Kinzhal missiles launched from aircraft, 9 cruise missiles launched from the Black Sea, 3 land-based missiles, and 9 drones, all destroyed, according to the Air Force. The defense minister calling it another unbelievable success for the Ukrainian Air Forces, adding, "Thank you to our Air Force service members and our partner states who invested in securing the skies over Ukraine and all of Europe." The overnight attack comes on the heels of fresh military investment from Western allies.
Повертаємось додому з новими оборонними пакетами. Більше нової, більше потужної зброї для фронту, більше захисту для наших людей, більше політичної підтримки.
President Zelensky speaking on his way home after his successful European tour. But Zelensky's priority remains fighter jets and increased support from the U.S.
Дякую, Британії, за домовленість міри. Ми продовжуємо працювати і над коаліцією винищувачів.
Down south, just off the front line, Ukraine is training troops as fast as they can. We expect the counteroffensive to start, and we are ready, this soldier says. Ready, another soldier adds, to finally end this war. These last 4 days in the bitterly contested town of Bakhmut, controlled largely by the Russian Wagner Group, have seen the first major battlefield gains for Ukraine in months. Momentum, the Ukrainians hope, that will drive their coming offensive.
Now, Joe, this morning and really for the last several days, the focus is still absolutely on Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians say they are turning the tide here. We are chasing an unverified video that has emerged where the Wagner Group chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, claims that American soldier has died in Bakhmut. NBC News has not verified this claim, has not verified this video. We are chasing this. We have reached out to all U.S. officials to get more information on this, Joe.
All right, Molly Hunter reporting from Kyiv. Molly, thank you so much. Now to the U.S.-Mexico border, where the number of migrants crossing into this country has dropped dramatically in the days after the end of Title 42 restrictions. But processing centers are still over capacity, and they're struggling to accommodate people who have already made it into border cities. NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer is in San Diego with the latest.
This morning, the Border Patrol continues to release thousands of migrants into the U.S. following the end of the public health order known as Title 42. Massive processing centers designed to hold 18,000 migrants are being pushed to their limits, according to DHS officials. One administration official telling NBC News those released most recently have been vetted, have court dates, and have passed credible fear screenings, the first step in claiming asylum. But court documents show DHS released over 2,500 migrants without court dates just after Title 42 ended Friday. The numbers overwhelming shelters and cities alike. The Biden administration is touting that illegal crossings have fallen nearly in half since Title 42 expired, though that's compared to the record-breaking surges of last week. The administration says stricter punishments under Title 8, the section of U.S. law dealing with immigration that was in place before Title 42 and is now being enforced again, is slowing the flow. This teen from Guatemala says she was turned back and told to apply for asylum at a port of entry. But Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says the numbers don't tell the full story.
They've reduced the number of people waiting in line because they gave everybody in line a pass.
It comes as busloads and trainloads of migrants keep arriving in cities nationwide. In New York City, some asylum seekers are now being housed in school gymnasiums.
They didn't really tell the parents anything until the kids came home and said something later on in the day. That's when we got notified.
This morning, a humanitarian crisis being felt far beyond the southern border.
Our thanks to Miguel Almaguer for that report. Migrants who cross the border illegally now face a 5-year bar on returning to the U.S. and possible criminal charges. Time now for a check on your Morning News Now weather. Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. We've got a heat wave still going strong in parts of the Pacific Northwest. That's where we've had multiple 90-degree days for a lot of cities. Medford being one of those. We're going to end up at 90 degrees again today. Low 80s for Seattle, but still, these numbers are way above normal for where they should be for this time of year. It's going to last a little while longer. We'll have a bit of relief in some spots. Notice by Friday, Seattle gets back down to about 80 degrees, but hits the mid-80s for Wednesday and Thursday. Still going strong with the 90s, or at least close to 90 for Medford through the next couple of days. So we could continue to see these record-breaking highs in some spots. Meanwhile, in the Northeast and in the Midwest, we have kind of a mixed bag. We're going to be into the 80s for Chicago today. Cincinnati hits 68 degrees, 82 degrees for New York. So running a little above normal, but that doesn't last for long. We'll slowly but surely start to see these temperatures coming down. And by the time we get into tomorrow, we'll see temperatures into the 50s for parts of New England, 68 degrees in Philadelphia. Out towards Detroit and Chicago, we'll hang out into those low to mid 60s for our afternoon temperatures. But it's Thursday morning that'll really get your attention. It's not going to feel all that warm like it has for days and days. We're going to start to bring these temperatures down. And in some spots, we could be dealing with frost advisories. Not great for those plants, especially those early buds that we've already seen in the gardening that I'm sure you've done on these warmer afternoons. Cleveland will end up at 41 degrees in the morning hours, 42 for Bridgeport, 42 for Boston. So just prepare for that on Thursday morning with an extra layer. You'll need it. Now, the fire alerts are still up for some of these major cities. Boston, Newport, Providence, Hartford, all included in that because we've got some gusty winds up to 30 miles per hour, and we've also got the low humidity, so we will look for that to stick with us through the day today. Meanwhile, in the mid-Atlantic, we have the potential to see some strong storms. There's 10 million people included in this. The risk is mainly going to be those strong winds, so gusts up to 60 miles per hour, but we won't rule out the potential for some large hail as well as those tornadoes in this area. Places like Knoxville, Boone, London all have that better chance to see that. But again, Nashville included in that, Chattanooga as well. Looking at the radar, you can see some of the heavy rain that is going to work through that similar area that I just mentioned. That's where we have the potential for some flooding concerns. We've already seen an active early morning hour with some thunderstorms there, but the potential for some flooding rains is going to be there here through at least the next couple of days. Here's the flash flood risk for today, where you see that darker blue, better chance to see the flash flooding, and you'll notice why. We have localized amounts up to 3 inches when we have rainfall rates that are kind of impressive like that, and all that rain happening in a really short period of time, flooding, of course, something that we'll have to watch for. Going across the southeast, though, over the next couple of days, this will be through Wednesday. What we'll have to deal with, notice there's a widespread area stretching from really Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, all the way into the southeast, including major cities like Atlanta, Asheville, Raleigh. We'll see those highest amounts, though, places like Kentucky. That's where we'll see those amounts upwards of 1, maybe 2 inches, up to 3 inches. So it'll be a couple of days where we'll have to watch for the flash flooding concern, Joe, as well as the severe storms and the temperature changes to come by Thursday for folks in the Northeast. We've got it all going on.
All right, yeah, these high temps aren't sticking around forever, I guess. All right, Angie, thank you so much. This morning, new developments in that deadly crash that killed a South Carolina bride on her wedding night. The groom was seriously injured. Authorities just released more details about the crash and the woman who they say was driving under the influence before she slammed into the couple's golf cart. Now we're hearing from the bride's family, trying to come to grips with their tragic loss. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk has the latest.
It's been more than 2 weeks since the Miller family gathered for a beachside ceremony to celebrate the wedding of their beloved Samantha.
My first thought was Sam finally has all the love that she's ever wanted. There was so much happiness.
This weekend, they returned to the same spot for a beachside tribute to the 34-year-old South Carolina bride. Sam, to friends and family, she was killed by an alleged drunk driver last month, just hours after taking her wedding vows. The last person Sam spoke with before the car crashed into their golf cart was her new husband.
She looked at him on the golf cart and said, "I want this day to last forever."
Lisa, you knew when you heard the sirens that something terrible had happened.
I did. I don't know how I did, but I'm like, something happened to Sam. I literally screamed it.
Also still grieving Sam's husband, Eric. Hundreds of people joined Eric and the family Saturday, paddling out into the ocean and placing flowers with Sam's name on them into the water to honor her memory. As Eric recovers from injuries sustained in the crash and her family picks up the pieces, new details are emerging about the incident. A recent police report includes this image showing the golf cart that carried the bride and groom, along with 2 other family members, tangled with the car that hit them. The driver of that car was 25-year-old Jamie Koborowski, who, according to a toxicology report, had a blood alcohol level more than 3 times the legal limit.
What would be justice for you, Lisa?
Whew, that's a tough question. A lot of people refer to it as an accident, and we feel like it's not an accident. She made that conscious decision, so it's not an accident.
GoFundMe started by both families have raised nearly $800,000. A life cut short and a story touching and breaking hearts.
Our thanks to Stephanie Gosk for that report. The driver of that car remains in jail awaiting trial. Her lawyers responded to NBC News with a statement reading in part, "We simply ask that there not be a rush to judgment. Our court system is founded upon principles of justice and mercy, and that is where all facts will come to light." Let's take a look at what's making headlines around the world this morning, starting with a deadly fire at a hostel in New Zealand. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome with that and other international headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Yes, authorities in New Zealand say that at least 6 people have died after a fire broke out in that hostel in the city of Wellington. Now more than 50 people were rescued, but the fear is that the death toll may rise as 11 people are still unaccounted for. Firefighters were called at about midnight local time and found the top level of the building ablaze. The cause of the fire is still unknown. Let's go to Japan, where Tuesday, dozens of activists demonstrated in Fukushima against plans to release into the sea water from the nuclear plant severely damaged by a tsunami and earthquake in 2011. Officials say that the previously highly radioactive water from the plant will be filtered and diluted with large amounts of seawater before it's released into the sea. But some scientists and the activists say the long-term impact to the environment and to people is still unknown. And let's end this short tour of the world in Nigeria, where a chef managed to cook for 100 hours, setting a new record for the longest hours non-stop cooking. In that time, the chef, Hilda Baki, cooked dozens of Nigerian dishes, including soups, stews and rice, with people coming to cheer for her through the day and night. Now, the previous record was held by an Indian chef who cooked cooked nonstop for only 87 hours in 2019. But the Guinness World of Records say they need to review all the evidence first before officially confirming the record. But I fear, Joe, that all that evidence was eliminated by the people who ate the food.
That is a very good point, but congratulations to her. You know, it takes me about 100 hours to make one meal, so I should maybe consider entering the contest. And I look about that tired when I'm done. So, all right.
Yeah.
Claudio, thanks so much. Welcome back. Voters in Jacksonville, Florida are heading to the polls this morning to vote for their next mayor. It is a hotly contested race. Democrat Donna Deegan, a former news anchor, is facing off against Republican Daniel Davis, a local official. And the results could serve as a bellwether, telling us how 2024 presidential candidates will fare in the state. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Jacksonville. So, Shaq, it's Election Day. Where does the race stand as voters head to the polls there today?
Well, if you look at the polls, things are extremely close. Both sides describing this essentially as a jump ball as we head into Election Day. You mentioned that this is a race that has been extremely contentious, and you've seen ads, millions of dollars in ad spending on both sides. You have Democrat Donna Deegan. She's known for her charitable giving. She was a television anchor here in Jacksonville, so she's pretty popular in terms of being well known in this area. Going up against Republican Daniel Davis. He's a longtime local official in this area. So two well-known figures going up for this contested race.
So Jacksonville is a battleground area in a state that at least a few years ago was considered a pretty big battleground state when it comes to presidential politics. On a bigger scale, the results could be pretty far-reaching. Tell us what's at stake here, why we've sent you there to cover this one.
Well, this will really help determine whether Democrats can still win in the state of Florida, specifically in areas where they had success previously. If you look at Jacksonville, specifically Duval County, this is an area where Democrats won in 2018 statewide races. President Biden won it in 2020, and then came Governor DeSantis' re-election effort. And you saw that ground that Democrats have really completely evaporate. And I want you to listen to what I heard from both party chairs about why this race is something they're both investing in heavily and watching extremely closely.
Duval County is a battleground. It is an epic battleground, and in a microcosm, it epitomizes the great struggle between the right and the left that's been involving our nation for years now.
Jacksonville is one of the last major large cities, not only in this state, but in the country, that still has a Republican incumbent. This is a true opportunity for us to get a Democrat elected to this office for the first time in 8 years.
Jacksonville is Florida's largest city. It's one of the few major cities across the country that's currently run by Republicans. Democrats feel like they have an opportunity here. Now is the moment to see if they can capitalize on it.
So, Shaq, I know you spoke with chairs of Republican and Democrats in Duval County. What issues are they saying voters are most concerned about right now?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. When you talk to Republicans and Democrats, especially officials, you usually hear different things, different topics that are being brought up. That was not the case when I talked to both party chairs here in Jacksonville. Listen to some of those conversations.
They're concerned about public safety. Public safety is a very important issue in Jacksonville. They're also concerned about affordable housing and the cost of living.
Crime, housing affordability, and infrastructure spending are probably the biggest issues that we have here locally. Jacksonville has the unfortunate benefit of being the murder capital of this state.
It's almost as if they were reading from the same script there. Of course, both of the candidates have different solutions, different policy prescriptions to address those issues. But in terms of what's on the top of voters' minds as they go into the polls or polling locations like the one behind me, there's broad consensus on what those issues are and what's their main focus.
And Shaq, have national politics played into this local race at all? Have you seen that in any of the rhetoric or any of the concerns from voters?
Absolutely. You know, it's very similar to what we were talking about a couple of months ago during the midterm elections. The big thing that you're hearing, and you heard both party chairs mention the issue of crime, mention the issue of public safety. Well, you have Donna Deegan being accused of wanting to defund the police because of her attendance at some Black Lives Matter rallies a couple of years ago. You have Daniel Davis saying that he wants to help fund police. He wants to back police and add more police officers to the beat. So that national messaging of defunding the police and support for police departments, that has made its way into this local race. The one issue that hasn't been brought up, and this is interesting in both conversations with the party chairs, is the issue of abortion. That's one that we talked about extensively over the course of the midterm elections as we were covering it here in Florida and elsewhere in the country. But that was not a top issue that those officials brought up. It's important to note that that is a policy that's run at a state level and not a city level. But the fact that that has not made its way into the debate as much as it has in many other elections, that is definitely notable, Joe.
Yeah, and as you saw firsthand just a few weeks ago in Wisconsin, granted that was the state Supreme Court, but that was the huge issue there. Shaq, do we expect we could have the final results by the end of the night tonight?
That is the hope. You know, both sides say this will be extremely close, that this will be a tight race as we get into the evening. One official put it to me as a guess that even if his side wins, that it'll be a 52 to 48% race. So that means things could come up close. We could be waiting late into the night. But here in Florida, they do count votes fairly quickly. They've been processing those early votes for some time now. So we should expect to have a result by the end of the night. But one thing that you're hearing from both sides, and it's almost like they continue to say the same things. You don't see that too often, but they both say that this is a battleground. They call it a knife fight. They say this is going to be that hand-to-hand combat. They feel like it's really going to come down to those final few votes, and it's going to come down to who shows up today, because they have early voting numbers. That gap between Democrats and Republicans with early voting is actually tighter than it has been in previous elections. So that means both sides have been participating in early voting, and both sides will be showing up to really flood the polls and have their voices heard in this very contentious and very tight election, Joe.
All right, Shaq in Jacksonville, thank you so much. If you're planning to drive on Memorial Day weekend, you'll probably notice more older cars on the road, maybe even a little duct tape. It's because drivers are now keeping their vehicles longer. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock tells us why so many Americans are putting the brakes on buying a new car.
With demand for vehicles in overdrive, new data shows Americans keeping their cars and smaller trucks for a record 12.5 years. While they're lasting longer, they're also more expensive, which is why South Florida mechanic Nick Osborne is still holding onto a 2007 SUV. Under normal circumstances, would you still be driving around in this?
No way. I would already replace this car.
The father of 5, swapping out an engine with 200,000 miles for one with a mere 100,000, a short-term fix that fits his family's budget. Do you feel safe driving this?
No, not at all. 200,000 miles, no. You know, and then my kids are in it. I'm not sure if I feel too safe for 200,000 miles. You know, but do I have a choice? No, I don't have a choice.
It's the impact of years of pandemic-fueled shortages, supply disruptions, and heightened demand. The average used car payment is more than $560, and for new vehicles, nearly $730. According to one group, that's up more than $250 a month compared to just 5 years ago. Industry analysts say pricing, higher interest rates, and greater reliability of newer cars all play a role.
Someone going into the market for the first time in a while, they're going to be shocked as to how high the prices are for both new and used cars.
A byproduct of this trend, auto repair shops are seeing way more customers.
Even with high mileage, they're keeping the car. Yeah.
We've seen an average car go from anywhere between 80 to 90,000 miles, now over 100, 150,000.
Many hoping to ride out this tidal wave of demand, like Nick.
I wish I could afford a minivan right now with a lot less mileage.
When the road to ownership is a little smoother. Sam Brock, NBC News, Miami.
Welcome back. It's time for our CNBC Money Minute. New numbers show Americans are not holding back when it comes to spending. CNBC's Savannah now joins us with that and other money headlines. Savannah, good morning.
Joe, good morning to you. Yes, so Americans continue to rack up debt. A report from the New York Federal Reserve shows that total consumer debt hit a record high in the first 3 months of this year, topping $17 trillion. Now, that's despite a sharp pullback in mortgage lending. New home loans peaked above $1.2 trillion in 2021, but have been falling since as the Fed has hiked interest rates. The average rate for a 30-year mortgage is now about 6.4%. Elon Musk says he must now approve all new hires at Tesla. In an email to staff seen by CNBC, Musk expressed concern about the company's current practices. Reports say staffers are reading the email as either a soft hiring freeze or a signal Musk is shifting his focus back to Tesla now that he's named a new CEO of Twitter. Musk has generally been involved in approving hiring and budgets since becoming Tesla's CEO in 2008. OpenAI plans to release a new open source model to the public. Open source means the code is open to anyone to modify the model for any reason for their specific purpose. The move comes as OpenAI, that's the company behind ChatGPT, is facing competition from Meta and others. The information reports OpenAI is unlikely to release a product that's competitive with ChatGPT, as that's the company's primary way of making money, which is through selling access to the technology, Joe.
All right, Silvana, thank you so much. And let's keep talking about AI. Microsoft is quickly moving forward with the implementation of its latest artificial intelligence technology. Now, some of its household software brands like Bing, Excel, and Word will be using tech like ChatGPT to help users carry out their day-to-day tasks. CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin spoke one-on-one with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella about the partnership and controversy surrounding this emerging use of tech. Here's part of that conversation.
We're moving from the autopilot era of AI to co-pilot era of AI. Yes, it's moving fast, but moving fast in the right direction. Moving fast where humans are more in control.
What scares you about this?
What, I'll call it, societal choices do we make given this new technology? We definitely want the benefits of this technology, and we want to mitigate the unintended consequences.
How is this going to change education and the idea of what people, the next generation, are going to have to know, need to know?
I think we will adjust to work with these tools. Critical thinking will still be very much what humans do, but I think that there is an opportunity for us to retool ourselves with new tools.
You can watch the rest of that conversation and more on this topic when Special Edition with Andrew Ross Sorkin, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, airs tonight at 10:30 Eastern right here on NBC News Now. Well, you've heard of self-driving cars. How about self-driving buses? Over in Scotland, a community is experimenting with the idea in what's thought to be the first route of its kind in the world. NBC's Matt Bradley has that story.
The wheels on this bus go round and round like any other. But the steering wheel seems to have a mind of its own. This bus has declared its autonomy, and it enters into service.
Is this the first in the world? So we believe it's the most advanced in the world. There have been other autonomous buses, but we believe this is the first registered timetable service where we're making a commitment to passengers that we're going to be there on time delivering a public service.
5 of these buses will patrol a 14-mile route across Edinburgh's Forth Road Bridge. A bus every 30 minutes, reaching speeds of up to 50 miles an hour, serving as many as 10,000 passengers per week. But this is still very much an experiment.
So for now, this driverless bus does have a driver. He's here just making sure everything is safe, and there's another member of staff here taking tickets. That's 2 employees, twice as many as was needed before.
The idea is to eventually free the driver from babysitting the bus, but right now, that's illegal. Stagecoach, the company running this experiment, is hoping the law will change soon.
And when the technology is completely signed off and we're allowed to take the safety driver out of the cab, they'll be able to move around the saloon, engage with passengers, check tickets, keep the service accessible, that kind of thing.
As far as drivers are concerned, autonomous buses are sophisticated and safe.
You ever had any close calls?
No, I haven't. No.
Are you worried that you could?
No, not really. The technology, I think, is brilliant. It stays in its lane, it brakes. When it senses other traffic, the only thing you've maybe got to worry about is other motorists not knowing what they're going to do.
The bus itself does most of the work, with some high-tech help.
So when you say a sensor, is that these things right here?
Yeah, so that's one of them. That's a LiDAR. That's for the closer range detection.
So if the technology has arrived, the real problem is still humans, pedestrians, drivers. By behaving unpredictably, they're the ones who are standing in the way of wider adoption of this technology.
The biggest barrier with autonomous vehicles is dealing with people, especially in urban environments, where people are making decisions of their own, sometimes stretching the rules just a little bit so that they can get by and collaborate with each other.
But the humans of Edinburgh aren't all ready to board the bus.
They say it'd be safer by reducing human error.
But then, I don't know, I've seen the movies and the robots something always happens.
And will you be happy about it?
No.
No. You're scared?
Let your life in the hand of a machine that could have faults. Yeah, so far it proved that, yes, human error exists, but it's less than machinery for the moment.
They may have a point. Accidents involving autonomous vehicles have happened.
Ain't nobody in it. This is crazy.
And in San Francisco, this driverless car sped off after it was pulled over by police. In February, American safety officials pushed Tesla to recall more than 360,000 full self-driving cars because of unsafe driving and road violations. What do you say to people who are worried that this is unsafe?
I say that we've got a vetted safety case there that has gone through millions of miles of testing, and there will always be the safety driver there ready to intervene.
So if you're worried about autonomous technology, maybe think of it this way. These drivers never have a bad day. They never get distracted. And these sensors never blink. But experiments like this one are as much about calming the public as they are about testing the tech.
We still understand that we need to ensure that the public come with us on this, and that they're convinced that this technology is safe and has benefits for everyone. So I think there's still work to be done on that side of it, but the technology is ready now.
Our thanks to Matt Bradley for that report. Despite all of this being experimental, if it works, the same technology could be rolled out in 4 more UK cities. We're back now with an update on the Tony Awards. It looked like the awards would not make it to TV after the Writers Guild rejected a strike waiver from producers of the show. Well, now it looks like there is a chance the show might go on. The Tony Awards Productions is updating its ceremony to meet requests from the WGA. In response, the Guild no longer has plans to picket the show. Now, there's still no confirmation on whether Ariana DeBose would host. Bottom line, these new developments open the door to the possibility that musical lovers will get to see their favorite Broadway stars on the small screen in some form or fashion. Stay tuned. Well, if you've already apologized for something that wasn't your fault this morning, you're not alone. And I'm sorry. Studies show it is a particular problem for women. Well, now there is a new push to dial it back. Today, anchor Jenna Bush Hager takes an unapologetic look.
Stop saying this word if you want to be more respected. Word sorry.
Are women over apologizing?
Sorry. Do you have a minute?
From Pantene commercials to Netflix's The Diplomat, there's growing push to say sorry. I'm not sorry.
You just said I'm so sorry.
I am sorry.
But you didn't do it.
Well, I'm still sorry.
Don't apologize for things that aren't your fault.
Yes, I'm sorry.
For what?
Experts say that verbal tick can get things off on the wrong foot.
Often starts with, hey, I'm sorry to bother you, or I'm so sorry I have to do this. So we kind of give the excuse before we give the reasoning, which discounts a lot of what they have to say afterwards. Because now I'm kind of like, well, what are you apologizing for?
Tish Harrison Warren, a fellow Austinite and a priest in the Anglican Church, recently wrote about saying sorry for the New York Times.
I was raised in the South, where women are often conditioned to apologize compulsively. I've apologized to coffee tables I bumped into and then laughed when I realized it. Some friends tell me to stop apologizing so much. Inevitably, I reply, I know, I'm sorry.
You and I both grew up in Texas, and there definitely was an emphasis on manners and definitely learning to say please and thank you, but also sorry. Did you have to wrestle with sort of where we were raised in this notion as well?
Yeah, definitely. And because I think women in the South do apologize more. It's a cultural thing. There's times when it can be a way to kind of shrink ourselves or try to disappear this, that you're apologizing for instance, like having feelings and thoughts and opinions in the world.
One study found that women apologize more than men because they report committing more offenses. But Pastor Warren is quick to note, just because men apologize less doesn't mean women should too.
It's another way of saying, well, the way women speak or do things is wrong. And so if men say sorry less than women, which is statistically true, the solution then was not like, well, maybe men need to say I'm sorry a bit more. It's that women need to say I'm sorry less.
Being kind and being empathetic and being humble are definitely things that sometimes we can miss.
There's a humanity that needs to be recognized, that part of it is with things like please and thank you and I'm sorry, and just basic kind of respect in the way we speak.
Tish concludes maybe it's okay to not be sorry for saying sorry.
I'm still not quite willing to let go of I'm sorry. I know I apologize too much, and at the end of the day, I think I'd rather err that way than not say sorry enough. And if that is wrong, which it may be, I'm very sorry.
Jenna, thank you so much for that discussion. We do have some advice for you. Experts say if you are saying sorry as sort of a verbal tick more than an actual apology, try saying thank you instead. For example, instead of saying sorry, I'm late, you can say thank you for waiting for me. We thank you for joining us, and we hope you're not sorry about that. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.